Okay, so in previous videos we have been dealing with the topic, how the biblical promised land was stolen from Africa and relocated to the Middle East. Many believe the Israelites left Egypt and went north into the Levant. But the Bible, when read without external interpretations, tells a different story. Welcome to this special presentation where we delve deep into the scriptures to uncover a hidden truth that has eluded many for generations. Based solely on deductive reasoning and biblical textual evidence, we will demonstrate that the original Promised Land was located not in the Levant, but in Sub-Saharan Africa. The strongest evidence that the Promised Land was originally in Africa, before it was stolen, erased, and relocated to the so-called Middle East, has been ignored for centuries. But today, we are going to uncover the truth. This is not a casual exploration. This is an indictment of lies, of manipulation, of theft. The theft of a land, a heritage, and a covenant that was always African. Before we dive into the evidence, let me issue a warning. When you investigate this subject, you must go strictly by deductive analysis of the biblical text itself. Ignore the so-called scholars, ignore the colonial archaeologists, and ignore the traditions of Western theology that were built on lies. Because if you try to uncover a theft using the words of the thief, you will never reach the truth. And remember this: if someone relocates the Promised Land from one continent to another, they will not only change the map, but they will also duplicate and distort the place names to cover their tracks. That is exactly what happened. They took the names from Africa, planted them in the Levant, and trained the theologians, scholars, and the world as a whole to believe in their false map. So I have seen biblical researchers who ask the question, if the Promised Land was originally in Africa, then how come biblical places like Shechem, Bethel, Hebron, and Beersheba in modern times can be found mainly in the Middle East, and only occasionally do we find such names in Africa? These researchers forget that the modern sites in present-day Israel are a duplication of the original. Just think about it. If the Greco-Romans relocated the Promised Land, don't you know that they will create duplicate biblical sites in the Middle East to make the story believable, while at the same time trying to erase or rename sites in the original location? And that is precisely what they did. So the Exodus journey we started in the previous videos now continues in Deuteronomy 1 verse 7. The command given to Israel is simple and clear. Turn and take your journey, go to the Mount of the Amorites in the south. The Young's literal translation YLT says, And Moses sent them to spy the land of Canaan, and said unto them, Go ye up into the south, and go up into the hills. If we agree with traditional scholarly interpretation for a moment that Kadesh Barnea is indeed located at the northern edge of the Arabian desert, then Moses telling the spies to go south would not make sense at all, because going south when they were already stationed in the north of Arabia will take them to modern-day Saudi Arabia, and not the Levant. Now take note that according to the true African context model, before the command in Deuteronomy 1 verse 7, the Israelites had been wandering in the northern Sudanese wilderness after being brought out of slavery in Egypt. They had received the law from God at Mount Horeb, which is the same as Mount Sinai, and were brought swiftly to the borders of the Promised Land. All this was unfolding on the African continent itself, in the lands and deserts located south of Egypt, and not in the Sinai Desert or Sinai Peninsula in the northeast of Egypt. However, due to their fear and lack of trust in God, they refused to enter the land when first commanded. From Kadesh Barnea in modern-day Sudan, they sent spies to the south to survey the land, but their fear of the inhabitants and fortified cities made them disobey, leading to their punishment of wandering in the wilderness for 40 years until the disobedient generation died out. On this channel, we like using the Young's literal translation, YLT, because it sticks to the literal text without reinterpretation or manipulations. So Deuteronomy 1 verse 7 says, Turn ye and journey for you, and enter the Mount of the Amorite, and unto all its neighboring places, in the plain, in the hill country, and in the low country, and in the south, and in the haven of the sea, the land of the Canaanite and of Lebanon, unto the great river, the river Frat. This verse is a similar call as in other translations, urging the people to proceed and occupy the land surrounding Mount Amorite, including the plains, hills, lowlands, south, and coastal region extending to Lebanon and the great river Euphrates, The original name of the river is Frat, and not Euphrates. Notice carefully. The command is southward, not northward. The Hebrew says Penu Usiu, turn and journey, and then it says Hanejef, the south. Not once does the text say, go north. Not once. The Latin Vulgate of 1455 repeats the same phrase. Vertimini et prophecissimini. Turn and proceed. No back, no north, nothing. From Horeb, the path is south, deeper into Africa, toward Egypt's eastern desert and Sudan, the land of Cush. This is the first smoking gun. God never commanded them to leave Africa. The northward journey is a later assumption, not a command. The true directions place the Israelites squarely on African soil. Have you noticed how often the Bible shows sudden changes in direction, angelic redirections, or miraculous interventions? These are not random. They are inserted to confuse the geography. Exodus 13 verse 17 says, God did not lead them by way of the Philistines, although that was near, but he led them by the wilderness toward the Red Sea. Instead of a straight path, they are diverted. Exodus 14 verse 2 adds, tell the children of Israel to turn and encamp before Pi-Hahireth. Again, a sudden unexplained turn. And then, Exodus 14 verses 15 to 16. Tell the Israelites to move on, stretch out your hand over the sea. Another redirection, forcing a miraculous crossing rather than a natural journey. These diversions serve one purpose, to hide the obvious, that the Israelites were moving south, deeper into Africa, not northeast into Asia. Our second point to analyze is Genesis 10 verses 8 to 10. It says Nimrod, son of Cush, built his kingdom in Shinar. If Nimrod was Cushite, why would he leave Africa to build in Mesopotamia? He didn't. Old maps prove this. They show a Babylon in Sudan, sometimes called Babylon or Babylon. The city of Sennar or Sinnar, identical to Shinar, still exists in Sudan. The book of Jeremiah confirms the African setting. Over 50 times Jeremiah speaks of Cushites and Ethiopians. Jeremiah 38 verses 7 to 13 even describes Ebed-Melech the Cushite saving the prophet's life. If Israel were in Asia, why would a Cushite be so prominent in its royal court? But if Israel and Babylon were in Africa, this makes perfect sense. The truth is clear. Babylon, Shinar, and the kingdom of Nimrod were African. The later Mesopotamian Babylon is a fraudulent relocation. Next, let's talk about the end time when God himself regathers his chosen people. The regathering in Isaiah 11 verse 11. Isaiah 11 verse 11 gives us a powerful list of nations from which Israel will be regathered. Egypt, Pathros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, and Hamath. Western scholars stretch these across continents, but that makes no sense. Jubilees 9, 3-6 proves it. Shinar or Sinnar was part of Ham's land, west of the Nile, not Mesopotamia. Old maps show Shinar as Sennar in Sudan. Remember that Noah divided the earth among his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And this division was supervised by the angel of God and bound by an oath that anyone violating the allotted lands would incur a curse. This division is recorded in the book of Jubilees, where Ham's allotment is described as the land of Cush in Africa, including territories south and west of the Nile River. Canaan, a son of Ham, violated this oath by seizing land belonging to Shem and thereby incurred a curse, which supports the seriousness and permanence of this land division. Nimrod, son of Cush, is prominently mentioned as building his cities including Babel, Erech, Esht, and Calneh in the land of Sinnar, which the book of Jasher equates with Cush, thus placing Nimrod's kingdom within his father's allotted land in Africa rather than far in Mesopotamia, modern Iraq. There is no record of Nimrod violating the land division oath or being cursed for such, implying he stayed within his father's allotment. Abraham's father Terah is said to have served Nimrod, establishing Abraham's early life within this context before God called Abraham from Ur of the Chaldeans or Ur of Kassid. The book of Jasher and related sources place Ur, the birthplace of Abraham, within the African region or Cush, not in the traditional Mesopotamian location. This evidence logically leads to the conclusion that the original Israelites stemmed from African Cushite origins. as Moses is described reigning over the children of Cush in the book of Jasher. So the Israelites were fully African and had no Asian forefathers. Finally, old maps show Elam and Chad and Hamath also located in Ethiopia. When people flee war, they run to their neighbors, not thousands of miles away. So the regathering of Israel came from nearby African lands. This is the logic of the text, not the distortion of scholars. The Gospels describe Jesus constantly crossing waters, moving between the other side, and retreating into mountains before returning to the shore the same day. But in the Levant, the Sea of Galilee is tiny. Why would seasoned fishermen fear storms on such a small lake? Why would a crossing of a few kilometers create cultural zones of Jews and Gentiles? This makes no sense in Palestine, but it makes perfect sense in Africa, where vast rivers and lakes like the Nile and Lake Tana separate different nations, tribes, and languages. When John baptized at Anon, because there was much water, it fits Africa's abundance of rivers, not the dry Levant. Jesus' story belongs to a land of water, not desert. That land is Africa. Genesis 2 verse 13 links Cush to the Nile. Canaan, son of Ham, must have shared the same African haplogroups E1b1a and E1b1b, but the Levant today is dominated by J1 and J2 haplogroups. Genetics do not lie. Populations don't simply switch DNA overnight. If the Canaanites were truly in Palestine, we would see African haplogroups there, but we do not. Instead, E1b1 haplogroup remain in East Africa, exactly where the Bible originally placed them. This is more proof that the land of Canaan was in Africa, not the Levant. The apocryphal book of Jasher 55:31 delivers the knockout evidence. Joseph hides treasures in 4 locations. One near the Red Sea, one by the river Perith that translators fraudulently called Euphrates, and 2 others in nearby deserts. Think carefully. Joseph said he was hiding them so that the Israelites could take them when they left Egypt. That means all those places were within Egypt or nearby Africa, not in far-off Mesopotamia or Persia. This single verse proves it. The river Perith, Persia, and Media were all originally African place names, but were later stolen and reassigned to Asia by Western scribes. Also consider the following fascinating story in Jasher 72:13. The verse says, "And they said one to the other, It is because they saw that we were delayed in battle, and were greatly afraid of us. Therefore have they done this thing and raised the city walls and fortified them, so that the kings of Canaan might not come in battle against them." This is another smoking gun quotation. It is very clear from this particular quotation that the people of Canaan, and the land of Canaan was all the land around the land of Cush in Africa, and not the Levant in the Middle East. The neighbors that the people of Cush were afraid of were not a different group of Canaanites coming from thousands of miles away in the Middle East. Rather, these were their very close neighbors who could take advantage of the absence of the Cushite army, then attack them. So all the land around Cush, located south and west of Cush, which is Sub-Saharan Africa, is the original true land of Canaan. I am sure by now you would be wondering as to why scholars and empires moved the promised land out of Africa. 3 reasons: power and control. If Africa was seen as holy, colonial powers could not enslave its people or strip its resources. Theological supremacy. By erasing Africa, they justified slavery and colonization while painting Africans as cursed. Fear of truth. If the world knew that Israel was African, entire religious and political systems would collapse. This was not just geography. It was identity theft on a global scale. God promised David that his throne would last forever. And indeed it did. The Ethiopian emperors claimed descent from Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Old maps label African kings as Filius David, Filius Salomones. Psalm 68 verse 31 says, "Princes shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall stretch forth her hands to God." This is not poetic. It is prophecy fulfilled. The Davidic throne was never lost. It simply remained in Africa, hidden in plain sight. Conclusion. The evidence is overwhelming. From Deuteronomy's southward command to Isaiah's African regathering, from Nimrod's African Babylon to Joseph's treasures by the African Perith, the Bible itself testifies that the promised land was in Africa. The relocation to the Levant was a fraud, an imperial cover-up, a theft of the greatest kind. Not just land, but identity, covenant, and destiny. Jeremiah 8 verse 8 warns us, "The pen of the scribes is in vain." And so it was. But the lies cannot last forever. The truth is rising again. The promised land was Africa. The people of Israel were African. And the covenant was always with Africa. That truth cannot be erased. If you are a believer, this message is not meant to undermine the Bible or the scriptures. The core spiritual message of the Bible itself was not substantially changed. Rather, it is the geography and location where events unfolded that has been changed, switched around, and relocated. Therefore, this message is aimed at restoring the original geography, and so no one should lose faith in the spiritual message that they have believed. Restoring the original location makes you understand the Bible and its cultural context even more, so when you read, there will be no contradictions. Thank you for passing by our YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe and share this message, so you will be notified whenever we make a new video. Stay blessed.